We are at the History Museum, the County History Museum, right in the older part of town. The building was built as our first free library, thanks to funds from Andrew Carnegie. His program for funding libraries happened when he was a successful businessman. He had started U.S. Steel, his steel company. My understanding is the fine folk of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, home of the Steelers, and they asked him for money for a library. He had been distressed as a young teenager. He would write home to extended family in Scotland saying how upset he was. His day off from work, he could not get access to books because the library wasn't free. So when he was asked for money for a library in Pittsburgh, this is my conjecture, but I imagine the penny dropped and he thought, right, I'll stipulate that it has to be free. So once he had funded that library in Pittsburgh, and that is the Allegheny branch, well, his first steel mill was next door in Braddock. They were no fools. They heard, they asked him for a library. And at any rate, word got out. People wrote to him asking money for various cities for libraries. Grew to just over 2,500 worldwide. The majority are in the States, and my state of California, we were number 2 in the nation, 144 Carnegie libraries. 87 of those remain, which in itself is something of a miracle for 2 reasons. A, California has earthquakes, and the turn of the 20th century, you did not have the technology to build buildings that were not unreinforced masonry, which has a problem when the ground is shaking. Number 2, it's amazing that about 2/3 of ours survive because they had to survive the 1950s and the 1960s when old buildings were not respected. Who cares? Knock it down. Let's build something bigger and brighter and new. But communities did get attached to their libraries. Some use them as such, even till today. When Mr. Carnegie sent money, the standard loan grant was $10,000, which is what we got. And by the way, we got the money due to a letter written by the wife of a local businessman, Nettie Sinsheimer. Prior to that, our library was a few blocks up this street, Monterey Street, in a good-sized brick building named the Andrews Building for the gent who had it built. It was 2 rooms upstairs above a bank, and that small library was a subscription library, so you had to have 50 cents a year to pay for being part of the library, which back in the, say, 1890s was a considerable amount if you did not have means. Then, once we got the $10,000 in 1903, an architect, chap named William Weeks, that's W-E-E-K-S, was asked to be the architect for this building. He actually designed 22 of California's 144 Carnegie libraries. He was a chap from Watsonville, it's in the Monterey Peninsula, and he designed them as far south as Lompoc, little ways down the coast, and then a ways up the coast, some east of San Francisco. Mr. Weeks came, designed this building. It was completed in 1905, opened in September of that year, was our building for 50 years. When Mr. Carnegie sent money, he didn't necessarily micromanage. Cities could choose their own architects, choose their styles. California has numerous styles. Classical or Romanesque style, such as this one, was very common. But of course, in California, Spanish style was also quite welcome indeed. So cities could choose their own architect, their own style, but Andrew Carnegie did ask that the buildings be used for 50 years for library purposes. Not all cities did that, but San Luis did. So again, it opened in September of 1905. Come 1955, the city had grown from about 4,000 people to about 18,000. In the interior, as you may well show, standard floor plan, reading rooms on either side of the door, books generally were at the back. the floor extended all the way across until the year 2000, when we had got permission to cut the floor away to put stairs in. Then the librarian's office was near the stairs. Oftentimes, the smaller libraries had basements, and that was, again, often where the children's room was, because libraries were dead quiet. So you put the children downstairs in their own room, so the wee ones could have story time, the older ones simply be children, without the adults being tiresome and asking them to be quiet. So when this was built, it was great for 4,000 people, but for 18,000 coming and going, it was very tight indeed. So the city did choose another site. They let it be known that once library number 2 was completed and opened, probably at the end of 1955, that this lovely old building was going to be knocked down. Because again, it was the 50s, who cares, just an old building. The building was saved by 2 different groups of women. They joined forces, each group wanting a museum for a different reason. They went to see the people around the city and pretty much said, why knock down a perfectly good building? We need a history museum, let's use the building. Knowledge used to be appreciated. Now about 35% of the country seems to feel that learning, having an open mind, is not necessarily important. One of Andrew Carnegie's, big things was learning. He so much appreciated having books, having the access to them. And again, back when he arrived in 1848, being that libraries were not necessarily free, schools didn't have libraries in the way we know them now. So if a child's parents couldn't get access to books, that child didn't have much of a future. For girls in such a family would have been poor because they wouldn't have had the money or not well off. And the girls most likely would have got married off 16, 17. The boy's future would have been manual labor. So, whilst Mr. Carnegie was very, very, very much of a capitalist, what he ended up doing was helping millions of people get access to books for free.